could even be a level 5 seamlessly. So I think that's maybe kind of one thing to be kind of looked at there. In relation to costs, so Deputy Ward, I mean, absolutely. I mean, costs are, with regulation, it does cost more, and it is about making the NCS, the National Childcare Scheme, accessible to families to kind of keep about the cost down. So you need kind of two things. You need grants and supports for the childminders in terms of being able to implement and meet the regulatory needs, whatever they are, as minimal as they should be. But there are going to need to be supports in relation to there. So kind of capital kind of investment, if it is that they're going to be needing to do things in relation to kind of fire safety, or if they need to buy some kind of equipment in terms of meeting those requirements. But also from the parent side of stuff. So investment into the National Childcare Scheme. So in terms of when the childminders will be able to register, then obviously the parents will be able to avail of it. But the National Childcare Scheme has, while it's brilliant in terms of bringing, kind of more parents and providing subsidies for more parents than what it previously did, it does have kind of difficulties and glitches in relation to, I suppose the maintenance of the system, the generation of chicks, to see how much a parent is going to be eligible for. So those kind of things need to be sorted out, because they will be an extra burden on a childminder in terms of engaging with, along with the kind of practice that they're going to need to go with. And we know that actually I was on one of the Fine Gaels last night, in relation to the results of their policy, and there was a parent on there, and she was talking about the NCS and how, as a parent, she's finding it particularly challenging because things keep changing and she keeps having to go back into the system. So those, I suppose, kind of glitches need to be worked out, and there needs to be enough subsidy available to the parents that it makes worthwhile for them to sign up to availing of that subsidy, and to the childminder, when they are able to avail of it, to make it worthwhile, that the responsibility that they have and the interaction they need to have about kind of signing in and engaging with the chicks and supporting the parents around it, that it's worthwhile for them there as well. So I suppose some of the glitches with the NCS needs to be worked out. In relation to tax incentives, I'm not an advocate in relation to tax incentives, because you're presuming that people are paying tax, and do they have to put money in up front, etc. So I think it would be best if it's kind of a kind of direct subsidy, whether it's to the childminder or whether it's to the families in relation to subsidies.
Okay, so Miss Heaney and then Miss Walsh, and I know there was probably some questions there that you didn't feel you got to address from earlier. So if you want to address kind of those together now, thanks.
Thanks, Deputy Function. Just to thank you for your questions about what kind of inspection would be appropriate, Senator. I think that there's a fundamental principle at play here, and that is that as a state, we have a responsibility to inspect these settings, not because there's money changing hands, because there isn't yet in most settings. There should be more money changing hands via the National Childcare Scheme, and the introduction of an inspection regime will facilitate that, and that's in the best interest of children and families. But the inspection, to have an inspection regime, is absolutely a requirement that the state must deliver on, and I'm really welcoming the fact that we're having that conversation here today. So, I just want to confirm that. As to the level of the inspection regime, I've already said that obviously we need to take that with. I don't like the phrase light touch, because I think that that's synonymous with bad times in the very recent past in this country. But I do think that needs to be negotiated and discussed with people who work in this field. But at the very minimum, we want to build on what it is about childminding setting that parents are choosing. They are choosing a home-based setting. So absolutely you don't want to be closing out a kitchen. Absolutely you don't want to be closing out a garden. They are the things that parents are choosing, that they enjoy about childminders using a childminding home. So we need to make sure that they are retained. But we must make sure that the places are safe, that the food that the children get are nutritious, that there are no fire issues, for example. So the fundamentals of a safe location, I would think, to begin with, would be important. I won't go into the issue. The National Childcare Scheme, in our view, needs to be available to all families that are using childminders, and we need to be building on the National Childcare Scheme because it does afford us an opportunity to develop a Scandinavian model of support in order to deliver a more affordable childcare system in this country.
Okay, and then Ms. Walsh.
Just in relation to affordability or making childcare more expensive, there is no major capital investment required for childminders. The house is there, the building is there. Maybe equipment is needed or whatever. Unless regulation is over onerous, there will be no major investment required. However, there is investment needed in mentoring, for childminders to be mentored by experienced childminders to make this transition. And that is really important because there are lots of childminders who have come through this system already and left it because of over-regulation. And that needs to be addressed to bring those people back. There was a lot of money spent in the early noughties on those childminders and who have left the system completely because of the fact that creche-based regulations were imposed on them and they were actually frightened out of the sector.
Okay, so we are moving on then to Deputy Jennifer Whitmore. And Deputy, can you confirm your location, please?
I'm in Ag House on the Leinster House campus.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and just thanks to everyone for coming in today. It's a really interesting conversation, and I think it's one that's been a long time coming and a long time needed. Personally, I've used childminders, and the reason I've used childminders is because essentially it was like having a second mammy for my children. They would go to their house, they would, do the homework with their children, they would cook with their children, they had someone who loved them, looking after them and taking care of them, and I think that's something really, really valuable. I think each family is different and each child is different, and their child care needs are different, and we do need to have all those choices, and even each child at different stages need different levels of care and different types of care. And I personally, always picked childminder for the first couple of years, and then when they needed that little bit more socialisation or formalisation, they went into an ECI scheme or into a creche-based scheme. So I think we do need to ensure that we have that choice available for families, and that all families can use it. And speaking to friends of mine who would childmind, I know they're really nervous about this. They're really concerned about what it could mean for them. And I think the communication part of this is going to be absolutely key. And Ms. Heaney, you were talking about pension, insurance. There are a huge number of benefits and securities that could be potentially built into this system for childminders, while still getting the balance right and having a very family-based care being given. But I do think communication is going to be the biggest thing in all of this. And it's not just about what the childminders want to see. Obviously, that's a large part, but I do think it's really important that we're going to be talking to parents to find exactly why parents send their children to childminders. And I think a lot of the time it is that sense of love, family, and just normal living in someone else's house that they're seeking when they're sending their children to childminders. And it's also the simplicity and the handiness, and they pick up the children at school and they do all that normal stuff. And it's making sure that we bring that into the system. And so therefore, I do think that it has to be a very community-based and sort of grassroots approach to this system if we do bring it in, if it does get put in. And I'm just wondering, do you see a role of the county childcare committees in that? Because when you look at 2 other countries and the regulation of childcare, a lot of the time it is on a very, very community basis that it's regulated and managed. And is that a better approach to use? Because I don't think that would be as I suppose it wouldn't bring that sense of fear with it, I don't think, if that was the how it was being managed and rolled out. And I do have to ask this question, Ms. Lynn, your Go Fish policy, what What was that about? Could you explain? Is that an actual thing? Can you please tell me what's in it if it is? So I suppose to all our speakers, the main question is, do you think that having the county childcare committees as a fundamental role out of this process will be useful? And then the specific question to Ms. Lane about the goldfish policy. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Well,
I'm going to actually start with Ms. Lane, because she had indicated before, and then I see Ms. Burke and also Ms. Quinn and Ms. Byrne. Can I just ask witnesses, can they try and be brief as well, please? Thanks. So, Ms. Lane.
No problem. Simple thing, goldfish policy. Just like came in and said, you have a goldfish tank. Will the children touch that? Who cleans it? Who feeds them? Oh my God, they can get all sorts of illnesses from that. The list was huge. You have to have a goldfish policy. It has to be put up there. It has to be sealed off. Children can't touch it. They can look, but not touch. Now, they never did touch. I'm careful, but you have to have it written. Same with the hen. The hen can't run around the garden. She is in an enclosed run, but they're not allowed to touch it, not allowed to do anything. That's it, quite simply. And I did have my hand up a bit earlier. You were talking, Mark was discussing about our NCS. NCS is paid hourly based. Childminders charged per day or maybe a half day. This has been a problem with the NCS, where maybe a parent hasn't been taking the full day for the time, and that money has been recouped by the department or by Pobble, whoever. And that is causing a problem throughout the full day cares and that. So it would be a major problem for a childminder who's expecting, say 200 euros to come in for the week, and it's 20 or 30 euros is taken back. This has to be sorted. So that is a problem with the NCS, a big one, especially where you are very, very small, and every single cent that you earn is really important for your family and your family's income. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Burke.
Thanks very much. And just to answer your question about the CCCs, I do think that it's really important that childminders have local support, definitely. I think that's really very badly needed. I don't think we should wed it to any particular organisation. There's a structural review going on at the moment of all the structures within the early years. We don't know what it's going to look like in the future. And support for childminders can be housed in all sorts of different places. But I agree with the premise that it should be local support for childminders as well as national.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then Ms. Quinn and then Ms. Byrne.
Deputy Whitmore, yeah, I definitely agree in terms of that kind of local supports. I would agree with Bernadette in terms of not saying necessarily where it's housed, but I think the people who are involved in providing the supports, whether it's in relation to kind of mentoring or guidance in relation to kind of quality and having particular standards in childminders, I think that there needs to be an expertise in relation to childminding. Because we see it, even in relation to centre base, you could have mentors who, are very well experienced and qualified, maybe working with over threes, but maybe the mentoring and support that they can give for people who are working with under threes isn't really, as strong as it could be in relation to that age group. So I think the same needs to happen in relation to childminding. It is a very distinct, way of engaging with children, and I think that there is a danger, as we keep saying, in early year services in terms of schoolification of early year services, and there would be a risk of centrification, if you want to call it that, of childminding services. So I think that local kind of approach, but with people who have an expertise in relation to childminding.
Thanks very much, Ms. Byrne. Please.
Very quickly, Deputy Function, thank you so much. Yes, Deputy Whitmore, we would agree with the previous speakers. The local and the expert eyes are important. I suppose it's also important to acknowledge that the CCCs, as we all affectionately call them, are already doing this. There are development officers doing it and offering it. And there certainly are just ongoing discussions, and this is not a secret, in relation to workforce development, because it's something that has come out of the First Five strategy in strengthening links between smaller settings, for example, and childminders locally. And certainly if there is going to be commonality around qualification, even though it might only be a small part of what's expected of centre-based settings, if I could put it like that, there would be opportunities for training, there would be opportunities of co-learning. Not at all to take away from Marion's point, I entirely agree about particular kinds of expertise, but there's a lot to be said for educators, no matter which hat they're wearing, what they do all day, getting together for training and so on, and certainly in relation to shared services, if childminding does come more into regulation. But absolutely agree with the local and the expert, completely agree with that, yep.
Great. Thanks very much. Then we are moving on to Senator Lynn Ruane. And Senator, can you just confirm your location too, please?
Hi all, yeah, I'm in Leinster House, Chair. So apologies, I'm jumping through in and out of two different committees at the same time, and I kind of feel by the bits that I've jumped into that a lot of my questions have come up and have been answered. So I'm going to kind of hone in on a little bit of what's coming up for me in some of the conversations. And I suppose as someone who relied on childminders, especially when I earned very little or whether I wanted to go to college, I have this thing where I think obviously there's the need for professionalisation when we think of the safety of children, and then there's a fear of over-professionalisation and this judgment of what childcare should look like. And what comes up for me is in communities where there might be little literacy, early school leaving, there might be all different sorts of fears around TUSLA, around institutions, around departments, and you have all those things acting, I suppose, in the background, but making them no less capable or able to be childminders to their neighbours or their friends or their friend's daughter, because that's how I would have availed all the time of childcare. And a lot of the childminders I would have used really would shy away from being part of any sort of regulated system or registering with TUSLA. So I'm just wondering how I suppose the action plan can operate in a way that we can recognise the professionalism of something without over-professionalising it to the space where women and mothers, especially who are the least well-off in low-paid jobs, are not being completely then excluded from extra financial supports. And I'm just wondering, like, is that balance being, I suppose, failed so far in the action plans, and how actually this is panning out, and how can we actually make sure that women and one-parent families especially can be supported, and that we're not imposing some sort of ideal fairy tale idea of what some person's house is supposed to look like when they're minding their neighbour's child, you know. And I think, yeah, I suppose I'm a little bit concerned that my scenario is replicated all over our communities, and the difference that having access to childcare supports would have made to my life at the time. But I definitely then would have been caught out of being able to have centralised childcare or pay for private childcare. And I suppose there's a lot of people in limbo there. So I'm just wondering, does the proposed action plan adequately address those barriers currently faced by childminders who some of them may register, or some of them might have fears of registering, and how do you alleviate those fears? People are afraid they'll start to be means tested, or they'll start to have on-the-spot checks on their home, and not every community, I suppose, is really would really be into that kind of fear, you know. And sometimes that fear is not grounded in the childminding ability, but just, you know, the lives and the environments in which we're growing up in and living in. It's not really a question, more so just like it's kind of just a concern coming up. So maybe Francis or Teresa could answer that for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm very happy to, Deputy Function, if that's all right with you.
Go ahead, yep.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, Senator Ruane, absolutely. I mean, these are exactly the things that need to be teased out and rather quickly. Absolutely, all of those concerns. So no more than the issue that was brought up already about gender. There are absolutely concerns about ensuring that all families are involved and all potential childminders and potential childminders are involved. And of course, there are issues of concern that would, extend, for example, to, I'm going to say mothers, because as we've said earlier, it's largely to mothers that this all falls, this decision making. Mothers in direct provision, for example, mothers looking to come out of direct provision. So there certainly is a really important, and I really welcome your comments, it's really important that all of that, I know we use the word diversity loosely, but bear with me, that equality is front and centre in all of its forms, all of its visibilities, and absolutely there are communities where we've already seen it in relation to the National Childcare Scheme, where because people who aren't working have had to seek sponsorship, there was huge fear around just, I have to register, I don't want to register with TUSLA, not necessarily, as you have said, based on anything, just a fear, not there was anything untoward going on. And it's very good that the government and the department recognised that and expanded the list of sponsored organisations. So that kind of thinking is what's going to need to happen with the development of the plan.
Ms Burke, you're also indicating to come in.
Yes, please. And again, I completely understand your concerns, and I really welcome the fact that you've introduced that. There are such a variety of childminders. Every single family should be able to find a childminder that replicates their family home. It should be a local, absolutely, completely. And one of the things that does concern Childminding Ireland is that all the barriers or the thresholds to entering into childminding have to be as open and as inclusive as possible. And I, with great respect to everybody who's working very hard on all the various different groups, it does tend to be a self-selecting group of people who are on these groups as well, people who've been through education systems and, all the rest of it and used to working around a table and so on. And I think we need to be absolutely, completely dedicated to making sure that every single piece of communication that goes out, every single role profile that's created, any courses that are created are as open and broad and welcoming and plain English. And, I think sometimes people mistake the desire to professionalise with using language and terminology that can actually become a barrier. And that's not necessarily, professionalism is a very subjective thing. And I feel hugely passionately about it. And I, assure you of my very best efforts to try and ensure that it's as open and as inclusive as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And then Deputy Alan Dillon is our next speaker. And can you just confirm your location too, Deputy? Thanks.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'm on the banks of the Liffey here in the Convention Centre. So I firstly want to welcome our witnesses with us today and thank you for taking your time out, and especially Mary Welch from Kernahool outside Castlebar. You're very welcome, Mary. Certainly the early learning and childcare sector, along with the childminding services, have shown real leadership during the pandemic to remain open and to care for the children of essential workers at a time of real anxiety across our society. So we must acknowledge that. And so as someone who comes from a rural constituency, I understand the challenges that faces parents in accessing childminding or childcare services, and it can be extremely difficult in times, as some other members have referenced. And it's not always feasible to have centre-based providers within a geographic area, and certainly I feel that there's a need to have a variety, both home and centre-based. And also it's important that we keep children locally. I feel that having them locally feeds into the preschools, and that's hugely important for numbers and enrolment in rural national schools. And if parents are commuting to nearby towns, and must bring their children with them, there's a much increased likelihood that they will be attending a national school there rather than the one down the road. Just in terms of my line of questioning, firstly, I might ask Bernadette from Childminding Ireland, a question on a specific point related to her opening statement. You stated, Bernadette, that Childminding Ireland's core objectives are to support and represent childminders, but it's chronically restricted due to underfunding. You might be able to outline to the committee members what level of resources or funding would be necessary to support your organisation, and since now it's been included in more of a regulatory and support system in the years ahead. Also, I'd like to hear from our stakeholders present to date on their experience with the steering group who's overseeing the implementation of the action plan, and do you feel that you're getting the required representation and recognition that you're within the decision-making process and being consulted effectively as we move through the implementation stages and even around the workforce development planning process. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Deputy. So we'll start with Ms. Burke, and then if others want to indicate as well. Thanks. Okay, there seems to be some technical issue there, so we'll come back. We'll go to Ms. Heaney, please.
Thanks, Deputy Function, and thank you for the question. And I won't answer the question that you directed directly to Bernadette, Deputy Dunn. One of the things that I think it's important that we are in these discussions is ambitious for the early learning care and the school-age childcare sector in Ireland. As you correctly pointed out, our sector has really delivered throughout the pandemic, and we mustn't forget that, and we certainly mustn't forget that in the forthcoming budget. We're in the middle of all of these discussions at the moment about a new funding model and about a workforce development plan. And Deputy Minister O'Gorman shared with us in the Dáil just a few weeks ago that he's hopeful of an increase in budget for this sector because of the findings of those two processes. And one of the things that I'd like to suggest as well, Deputy, is that we would never plan our education system for primary schools other than to ensure that children don't have to travel far to go to their primary school. And I think it's not beyond us to plan similarly for children younger than that. A good local planning mechanism which has an appropriate line of sight on the number of childminders that are working within a local area and that are related or that also takes into account the number of preschools and centre-based settings allows us to know what the capacity of each individual rural area or EDI or whatever measure we want to use. And that allows us then to plan for expansion of that sector, be it increasing the number of childminders or centre-based settings. So I think we absolutely do have to be ambitious for this sector and plan properly so that there is a good, diverse mix of provision in each local area. And moving on to your question about the steering group, my understanding is that the steering group for this implementation plan hasn't yet been convened, Deputy. So I think it's up to all of us to make sure that the voices that need to be around the table, and I agree with my colleagues that obviously you want childminder voices around that table, but that we get a good range of voices around the table. So I hope that answers, well, that's a little bit of an answer to your question anyway, and thank you for your question.
I think Ms. Burke is back with us now.
Yeah, apologies for that.
Problem.
I had a bit of internet trouble there. Thank you, Deputy Dillon. You were asking about resources at Childminding Ireland, I believe, before I dropped out there. Thank you for your question. Really appreciate it. And I would say that we're completely under-resourced. We have 1 full-time member of staff, 4 part-time members of staff, and we're engaging regularly, at least weekly, with 4,000 childminding contacts. Our staff are highly skilled, dedicated, very overworked, and are passionate about childminding. Staff include former childminders. It's really, really difficult, even just in terms of attending meetings. And it was, you know, really, really outrageous that, especially at this period of time of change in the childminding sector, that the National Association of Childminding, if you like, the authentic voice of childminding in the sector, is completely under-resourced. And we really need additional funding to be able to support childminders properly. Thank you for your question.
And then Ms. Quinn.
Thank you, Deputy Function. I suppose just kind of looking at there, you know, in relation to the kind of funding, what's going to be needed. You know, one of the estimates, if you kind of look at the highest cost scenario, which probably is best case scenario in terms of the amount of people who are, you know, kind of brought, you know, kind of into registration and the families that can access it, is 51 million. So I suppose per year. So when we're looking at kind of budget, the government has indicated that they'll be at least doubling the spending in relation to early childhood education and care and school-age childcare over the next 10 years. A significant portion of that is going to need to go to childminding, and another significant portion is going to need to go to kind of school-age childcare, along with continuing to kind of resolve the issues that are within centre-based services. You know, where we're experiencing staffing crisis and kind of increasing costs. The statement in the action plan, and I know it's a reasonable statement that has to be acknowledged, but that says that, you know, the phases and how this action plan progresses is budget dependent, is worrying in relation to what was mentioned earlier, you know, potential stop-starting, and then maybe needing to cherry pick areas that can be developed because of lack of funding. We in centre-based services, there's been kind of a lot of difficulty that has happened as a result of sequencing and out of sequencing in relation to you know, kind of policies being implemented, and that's something we need to really be careful of, kind of within childminding, that if it is, and it will be, budget dependent, that we don't cherry pick in an order that creates perverse consequences, or that, you know, will create difficulties kind of within it. So I suppose the plan that gets tied to budget, it needs to be very clearly thought out, I think.
Okay, thanks very much. We have a little bit of additional time. I'm just wondering, does anybody have anything else that they would like to add? Either any of our own members of the committee or any of the witnesses feel that there was something they wanted to come in on maybe and didn't get the opportunity? Everybody's happy? No. Okay, so I have two people indicating so far. So we'll take Ms. Burke first, then Ms. Lane.
I suppose maybe if I could just go back to the regulatory question, if that was all right. I think that we need a very, again, you know, straightforward regulatory system. And I know it's Childminding Ireland membership criteria as well. But I think if you look at the package that they have around insurance for childminding, Garda vetting, child safeguarding, they sign up to a code of ethics, they have paediatric first aid, you know, something akin to that sort of, you know, and obviously some instruction in child development and nutrition. You know, keep it simple, make it accessible, and it's much more likely to work. There are plans, I should say, for continuing professional development and other opportunities for people to learn other practical skills that will support them in their childminding work. But I think the threshold should be as accessible as possible. And obviously, child safety is absolutely primary. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Lane?
Thank you. I'm just going back to a point about childminders working with centre-based with centre-based creches and that. I've had it the other way around, where I've had centre-based come to my home, and they were absolutely, completely taken aback. The freedom the children had, how relaxed they were, how they were just engaged and happy, and, you know, playing around and working together, and the amount of equipment that I've personally invested in over the years, and books and reading, and they just were so completely, found it so completely different from their own creches, that maybe instead of creches, having to go out to creches, and how that would work, I have no idea if you to drag a load of children along with you. I should maybe come the other way, that they could learn from us to make more homely, you know, because that's what they went back with ideas to their very large creche with major ideas from my home. So maybe it could go the other way around. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Heaney?
Thank you, Deputy Function. Absolutely, I agree with my colleague Ida that there's a lot to be learned from each other. There's no doubt about that. I just would like to add that and I've said this already, so forgive me for repeating myself, but we need to be ambitious for children. As I said, there are more children in childminder homes today and than in any centre, and we have a responsibility as a state to make sure that the people working in those settings and that those children are doing the best that they possibly can. I think it's important that we do acknowledge that quality cannot be assumed, and we should not assume that everybody has the same understanding of what quality looks like. What is good quality in one setting may not actually be objective quality, and we have seen to our cost evidence of that over the years. So it is important to inspect these services, and it is important to provide the supports that are needed for this sector. It's brilliant that we're having this discussion. Our colleagues in Scotland and in the north of Ireland are registered. They have achieved this ambition for children, and I really welcome today's discussion, and I look forward to getting through phase 1 anyway, and then moving on to phase 2 and 3 of this plan.
Thanks very much. Just before I wrap it up, I did actually just have one very basic question myself in relation to, we know that there is roughly 80 registered childminders, but do we have even an approx number of how many children are being cared for by childminders, even anecdotally, if any of the organisations would know that or can send on the information if they don't have it to hand? Yep. Sorry,
yeah.
Ms. Burke, and then, yep. You're just on mute there.
Sorry, Deputy. Do you mean the number of children who are being minded by those 80 TUSLA registered childminders?
Just in general, is there an approx number? I know we don't know exactly, like we know there's 80 registered, but is there a rough even idea, even anecdotally, of how many children are being looked after by childminders?
About 3.5 on average.
3.5 children per childminder?
Yeah,
okay.
On average.
Deputy Function.
So much.
Sorry,
Teresa. It depends on the childminding setting, because some childminders will have full-time and some settings will have children part-time, different hours, different days. But from our survey, I think it worked out at around 3.5 on average. But we can come back to you on that if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Ms. Heaney, you wanted to come in, did you?
Yeah, Deputy Function, the National Action Plan suggests that there are 82,000 children being looked after by the 15,000 childminders that the action plan is suggesting is out there. I think we all think it's probably, there's a higher number of childminders than that's quite a conservative figure, but using the mathematics that the action plan uses, that's the numbers that we're looking at.
Okay, thanks very much. Can I just say as well, just to acknowledge not just the role of the childminders, but I mean it is extremely difficult and demanding work for childminders, also for anybody that works in the early years setting, and I think particularly in the last year and a half, we've seen with COVID, everybody in that sector has seriously stepped up to the plate and really has been invaluable in the work that they do. And nobody would be surprised, I mean, it's a sector that I would definitely like to see, I suppose, getting a little bit more focus in relation to even the wages in the sector. And so it's great that we are having the opportunity as a committee to look at this, firstly to look at the area of childminding, but we do have a number of upcoming sessions in relation to the early years, and it is really, really important that we're looking at this. But just to acknowledge, I think, everybody that's working in that sector, because it's not an easy task, and I think it's been particularly difficult over the last year and a half. So just to put that on record. And then just to say to all of our witnesses a very sincere thank you. It obviously is a bit more difficult with people, having to zoom in. It's not like pre-COVID when we could have people in the room. And so just thanks to everybody for bearing with us, and also thanks to our own committee members for their questions and for sticking to their times. And so, it's great that we actually were able to get everything in the 2-hour slot, which can be difficult some days. So a very sincere thanks to everybody, and I just need to now get agreement to publish the statements, the opening statements, to the Oireachtas website. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Great, thank you.
Yes, agreed.
Thank you. And now the committee stands adjourned until Tuesday, the 1st of June. Thank you, everybody.